Good morning and welcome to the 12th meeting of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee in 2026. We've received apologies this morning from Monica Lennon. Our first item of business is a decision on taking items 5, 6, 7 and 8 in private. Item 5 is consideration of the evidence that we've heard on the Railways Bill LCMs. Item 6 is consideration of the evidence we have heard from Ferguson Marine. Item 7 is consideration of the evidence we've heard from the Environmental Standard Scotland. And item 8 is consideration of a letter from the presiding officer regarding the Ecocide Bill Scotland. Are we agreed to take these items in private? We are agreed. Our second item is consideration of a legislative consent memorandum and a supplementary legislative consent memorandum on the Railways Bill. The bill was introduced into the UK Parliament on the 5th of November 2025, and its main purpose is to establish Great British Railways as a new publicly owned body with responsibility for rail infrastructure and passenger services across Great Britain. It also makes wider provision in relation to railway funding, access to infrastructure and passenger representation. Now, the Scottish Government lodged an initial legislative consent memorandum on the 5th of November 2025, followed by a supplementary memorandum on the 20th of February this year, reflecting amendments made to the bill during its passage through the House of Commons. I note that the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee has considered the memoranda and, while drawing attention to limited information on one new delegated power, made no recommendations in relation to consent. The committee issued a targeted call for views, and I'd like to place on record the committee's thanks to those people who were able to respond within the very tight timeframes for their contributions to our scrutiny. This morning, we're going to hear from the Cabinet Secretary before considering what recommendations to make to Parliament on the Scottish Government's draft legislative consent motion. I welcome to the meeting Fiona Hislop, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Bill Reeb, the Director for Rail Reform, Transport Scotland, and Debbie Blair, a lawyer for the Scottish Government. Before moving to questions, Cabinet Secretary, I think you want to make a short, I keep saying short and no one listens, a short opening statement, but over to you, Cabinet Secretary.
So, Convener, can I just start by acknowledging the very serious incident of the fire near Glasgow Central Station over the weekend, and to pay tribute to the emergency services for their exceptional efforts throughout Sunday and into Monday. And it's a great relief, I think, to all that there have been no reports of serious injuries, and that's a testament to their professionalism and dedication. You'll be reassured that I have been constantly briefed throughout. I met yesterday morning with Network Rail and ScotRail as they assess the ongoing challenging implications as they plan to restore use of and services at Glasgow Central Station when it is safe and able to be reopened. So turning now to the purpose.
Secretary, just thank you for doing that, and thank you for also, I mean, all these things come with a risk to people who are trying to solve a problem. It might be useful if there is any update that you have to the committee on when rail services might be restored. I think there were some letters that parliamentarians got yesterday. Do you know any more than those letters when the services might be restored to Glasgow? So
obviously it's important that the Fire and Rescue Service give permission for access and use. I would refer everyone to the Network Rail and ScotRail updates, and they will communicate. Obviously, they've communicated today that the station remains closed. There will be traffic low level that can still go to Anderson, for example. They will communicate as soon as they can, and there's a topical question this afternoon, and there may be more updates by that time.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt at that stage, but I think it is a fundamentally important thing. So thank you. Do you want to move on to your LCMs?
Yes. So turning to the purpose of today's committee session, thank you, Convener, and to the committee for inviting me to give evidence on the Railways Bill Legislative Consent Memorandum and the Supplementary Memorandum. I've repeatedly called for a full devolution of rail in Scotland to strengthen the integration of track and train. However, the UK Government is not prepared to make that change at this time. I've therefore made clear that the Scottish Ministers would not accept any reduction in our existing devolved powers, and that Scotland must benefit from rail reform to the same extent as the rest of Great Britain. So the bill, as presented, respects those requirements, and I and Transport Scotland officials have had long and extensive engagement with the UK Ministers and Department for Transport officials to secure that position for Scotland. The Railways Bill was introduced in the House of Commons on the 5th of November 2025 and amended at committee stage in January. The Scottish Government considered that the bill as amended engages the legislative consent process because it contains provisions which alter the Scottish Government's, Scottish Minister's executive competence, and we laid the legislative consent motion on the 12th of December. The Delegated Powers Committee reported on the 5th of March, and following welcome UK Parliament amendments laid by the UK Government, we then laid that supplementary LCM on the 20th of February, and the Scottish Government's position on both is clear approval. The bill creates a new body, Great British Railways, which will operate, maintain and allocate access to rail infrastructure across the UK. GBR will also deliver passenger services that are currently the responsibility of the Secretary of State. The Scottish Ministers will retain current devolved responsibilities, including securing the provision of ScotRail and Caledonian Sleeper services and specifying and funding rail infrastructure in Scotland. The bill will introduce new provisions that will strengthen accountability for rail infrastructure in Scotland to Scottish Ministers, including a new and improved infrastructure funding regime and, importantly, new powers for Scottish Ministers to issue guidance and directions to GBR on areas of rail outputs that we specify, fund and set strategy for. My officials at Transport Scotland will undertake a detailed options appraisal to identify the best approach for Scotland's railway. As part of this work, they will engage fully with industry partners and stakeholders. This government is clear in its commitment to retaining the benefits of ScotRail delivering services in public ownership, and the bill does not change that. Scottish Ministers under the bill will have a power to commission GBR to deliver rail passenger services on their behalf, which could enable passenger services to be delivered in a more integrated way, but that is no means a requirement of the bill, and no decisions have been made at this stage on that option. Approval of the LCM simply acknowledges that power should ministers ever want to use it at some point in the future. I support the policy intent of the bill, particularly its ambition to maximise the benefits of greater integration while respecting devolved arrangements. And that support, of course, remains subject to full scrutiny of the final bill text and the Scottish Parliament's legislative consent process, should there be final House of Lords amendments. But I am very keen that the elements securing the powers and responsibilities for Scottish devolution are secured and supported by this Parliament in this term of Parliament, if that is at all possible. So I know the committee will have questions on the Scottish Government's position on the bill, and I look forward to addressing them. Convener.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. We're told it's a fairly complicated bill. In our briefings, I think was maybe an understatement. But there's an LCM and a supplementary LCM, and it's likely there'll be several more LCMs before the process is complete. Can I just ask, could you just reiterate to me why you specifically asked us to consider this before we had all the LCMs and all the details in front of us?
There's two reasons. Is the substantive part of the bill, as presented, was a result of prior involvement by ministers, which is a good example of what should happen, so that a lot of the issues that we had about trying to protect Scotland's devolved position and indeed enhance it were agreed in advance of the bill's publication. So building in devolved sensibilities at the start is always a good example. So the bill is complex. If you look at the bill, the provision for Scottish ministers is throughout the bill, and that is why there's a lot of clauses that require the LCM approach. We lodged the LCM in December. I think the Delegated Powers Committee did the right thing by taking time to go through everything. I have confidence that they have done that. There is not controversy within the contents of the bill. It's like, have the legislative consent applications been applied appropriately, which they have. My concern is, my main concern, however, is having secured that, and I think protection of devolution is really important for everybody, and we've managed to do that. We don't know what will happen next. And I think the Parliament setting out an assertive position is we have protected the powers of the Parliament and to some degree enhancements as well, that would be a strong message to whoever is looking at the bill at Westminster thereafter. The problem we've got probably is the interruption of, I wouldn't call it an interruption, it's a very important democratic event of the Scottish Parliament elections. But what that will mean is that by the time a new committee is established, one, they won't have the same experience as this committee has. Two, they'll have much less time. They'll only have weeks as opposed to months to consider the bill. And the House of Lords will be the final place for amendments is likely when they come back from recess. So I think the time and opportunity for the future committee and a future Parliament to have a view would be limited. It is anticipated that and well, I can only anticipate, but since the substantial amendments have already been made, we don't anticipate major amendments at the next stage. But if there were those amendments, the committees would only really have to look at those aspects of the bill and the final text, which I think would be restricted and limited. I would also add the supplementary LCM actually addresses a point that this committee identified in terms of transfers of assets at the end of a period of a period of ownership, or what happens at the end of that period of control of assets for provision of services. So actually the supplementary LCM was one that we asked for and wanted, has been provided, and actually reflects what the committee identified in the previous public ownership bill. So I think tidying up our responsibilities this side of the election on the substantive elements of the bill with a statement of the LCM as the bill stands at this stage would be an important responsibility for Parliament, and that's the view of the government.
I'm smiling slightly, Cabinet Secretary, because whilst the next committee may be short of time, this committee isn't exactly flush with time with all the things that we've got to do. So it's good to have had that explanation. Yeah. Just as far as I think your explanation is that the Railways Bill would deliver deeper integration across the network. If ScotRail, Caledonian Sleeper and Network Rail in Scotland is still within Scottish Government, how is that integration going to work? Could you just give us some examples so we understand that, Cabinet Secretary, please?
So currently it is integrated far more than the rest of the United Kingdom, and actually this Railways Bill tries to replicate the kind of benefits that we've had from integration of track and train across to the rest of the United Kingdom, and Lord Hendy, the Rail Minister, has publicly stated that. Currently it's done through an alliance and by agreement between ScotRail and Network Rail. What this bill will enable is a far more formal position on that. The form that can take will be up to us. We can decide that. But there are provisions to make sure that in any issues in relation to the Network Rail side of it, there will be a greater connection between the Secretary of State and ourselves. And indeed, in some elements, depending on what option is taken. Now, that will be for a future Parliament to scrutinise and look at. The framework of the bill just allows us to do it, and we can decide which way we want to go in terms of that at some point in the future. But that will be for a future Scottish Minister and a future Parliament to assess. So we could base things on the alliance itself. There could be potential for a joint venture. There could be potential for a subsidiary. The important point in there is the importance of the Secretary of State in some instances to make agreements with us. And indeed, there are elements with it throughout the bill where there's different aspects that should decisions be made by the UK Government and Secretary of State in relation to Network Rail, they have to consult us. Normally, it's the other way around, they consult us, but actually in some instances, it's the other way around as well. So a lot of that is still in play, and that will come later on.
Okay, thank you. I think the Deputy Convener's got some questions. Michael.
Good morning. A key part of making the new arrangements work effectively is the Memorandum of Understanding which will be developed between the Scottish Government and the UK Government. Could you maybe give us a bit of an insight into where things are at in developing that Memorandum of Understanding and whether you envisage that changing anything significantly from the existing relationships that the Scottish Government have and Transport Scotland have got with Network Rail?
So you'll be aware that there's already a memorandum of understanding. The difference with the bill, obviously, is it makes it statutory, which I think is really important in terms of that underpinning. It's still being developed and drafted. That will, I think, make sure that those relationships are strong, and that in terms of the cooperation that will still be required, because remember, we'll have powers over that which we fund, set strategy for. We'll also be able to provide direction and guidance for Network Rail, which we've never done before, that aspect of it in GBR Rail. So what will need to happen is the development of that memorandum will underpin those relationships and how that will work. Can I say, I mean, I've had 5 meetings prior to the publication of the bill, 3 with the Director of Rail, so the Minister for Rail, Lord Hendy, and 2 with the Secretary of State herself. And we're both wanting to make sure that it's a strong memorandum of understanding that helps us administer that. That's still in drafting. That's not a requirement that it needs to be published at the time of the bill. The fact it exists and has to be statutory is in the legislation, which is an important development.
So, I presume, given the underpinning of the MOU in statute, it will also provide an opportunity for parliamentary scrutiny at some point, once it's finalised?
I would assume so. I mean, I think that's something that everybody's interested in. I also gave evidence to the Westminster Committee, Transport Committee, that was looking at the legislation from their perspective. They wanted assurance about how it would impact on devolution, and they too were also interested in that once it was published.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, the next questions come from Douglas.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, you mentioned the Memorandum of Understanding. Will that also include things like dispute resolution? I'm thinking when there's a conflict between maybe Crossrail services and ScotRail services wanting to use the track at the same time, will that be covered by that MOU? And how it will be handled?
So we're currently developing the heads of terms for the MOU, and I might refer to Bill Reeve about the content on that. But you mentioned two of the issues that I think are of interest to everybody UK-wide is access and freight. They're the 2 issues that seem to be coming to ahead. On access, the bill itself states that that we have to be consulted in relation to access issues that affect us in terms of Scotland. So that's already in the bill, which is helpful. But Bill, do you want to go through where we're getting to with the heads of terms? With it? Obviously, it's not completed by any means.
No, not completed, although keeping us very busy. I would say that the engagement with colleagues in the Department for Transport has been really constructive, just about the best we have experienced. There is a genuine desire on colleagues in the Department of Transport to respect what we have achieved, which is reflected in their own bill. The MOU is focused on how we give effect to the intent of the bill through practical arrangements, like, for example, dispute resolution. So, yes, it's exactly that sort of issue. It's about the how we give effect to the intent that we are flushing out. And so far, we are encouraged by the constructive engagement. Looking forward to being able to consolidate a draft. Although in part, the final MOU will, of course, need to reflect any further amendments that may come in the passage of the bill in Westminster.
Mm-hmm. And Cabinet Secretary, I'm a big fan of open access operators. Are you assured that they won't be squeezed out by this, by the services operated by GB Railways or whatever it's called?
So we would not want that to be the case. Obviously, the access arrangements are still reserved. So obviously, in terms of those issues, they're primarily for the UK government. But as I reflected, the bill itself gives us some locus in relation to access, in relation to how they affect our services, and that's obviously cross-border and freight. And I think that's going to be, in terms of the operation of GBR Rail, that will become it's an important key focus.
So are you confident that they won't be affected by this bill?
I am not in determination of that. That's really for the UK government, but I will be making sure that from the Scottish perspective that they aren't. Okay. Is my view, but that would be something you would need to take, if you wanted to be confident, you need to engage directly with the UK government about that, which I'm sure counterparts at Westminster will be doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Convener.
Sorry, can I just push slightly on that? Yeah. The open access Cabinet Secretary has helped in some ways, in my belief anyway, keep the price of tickets down, because they're able to keep certificates seems to be lower than other people, and therefore to lose them might be dangerous, especially if they're moving from London to Edinburgh, Glasgow, and perhaps beyond in future years, depending on how we go with electrification.
I agree with you, but Bill, do you want to have a read?
Well, I suppose that there are, just to recap, there are sort of three broad types of open access. There's things like the operators you're referring to, like Lumo service across the border. We've also got import operators like the Jacobite, which does the steam train in the West Highlands, does a lot of good for the economy. That's also open access, and importantly, all freight trains are open access. The UK government is providing assurances to those communities in the bill. I think it's fair to say not all parts of the open access community are satisfied yet with those assurances, and I think this will be an area where it's quite likely there may be some proposed amendments in the Lords, although that is, of course, not for us to say. But for ourselves, this bill will give us more influence over those decisions in Scotland than we would strictly have at the moment. So it gives us an opportunity to reflect our policies of support for these operations more effectively. Not as effectively as if we were completely devolved, which would remain our preferred approach, but within that constraint, this takes us a step forward.
Last point noted, but the first point I think is the relevant for me is the fact that you're really aware of the issues and how important those open access agreements are, and that you'll continue to push for them. I'm sure it'll be something that will vex the next Transport Committee if these disappear. Mark, I think you've got some questions you want to ask.
Can I ask about the role of Transport Focus? Does that change at all as a result of this bill?
Yeah, if you can.
I think it's strengthened. There's some consolidation of powers in Transport Focus, so things like the Transport Ombudsman would move in there, and some work currently conducted by the ORR is consolidated into the Transport Focus organisation. So I think the bill has a useful strengthening of the functions of that independent body.
Okay, so that will be on a UK-wide basis. Do you anticipate any changes in the way that they would operate within Scotland, or?
Well, so the aspects of passenger impact is something that's running through what the UK government wants to do as part of the Railways Bill. Certainly, as far as we're concerned, in terms of the operation, in terms of devolved aspects, we do think that's an important part of the development of the railway. That public ownership means that we can focus on passengers and obviously make sure that there's the input and the impact from the organisations that represent passengers. But obviously what we're doing just now is dealing with the bill as it stands, as opposed to the operation of how services would be run under the control. This is obviously, that's a sort of separate issue from necessarily the legislation itself.
Okay. And in terms of that wider vision of what the railways can achieve going forward, I was reading ASLEF's submission. They're talking about a publicly owned freight operating company that can really, drive forward some of the strategic work we need to do on freight. They're also talking about, moving away from the private sector rolling stock leasing companies, which they believe are not delivering good value to the taxpayer. Is there room for that agenda within the work of GBR? How would you see, for example, with freight, the opportunities opening up? And do you support a public sector freight operating company?
We're very much in favour of promoting freight. We've had strong targets. We've invested considerably in the freight aspect of that. That's currently primarily driven on private arrangements. I don't think there's anything in the bill that would prevent Scotland from doing more if they so chose on a public freight aspect. It would require investment, as would, for example, different funding of the railways. Clearly, a lot of what, and I welcome ASLEF's response, it was on a UK-wide basis, so a lot of what they referenced in their response to the committee reflected more of a UK-wide basis. We're limited by our borrowing, so therefore, in terms of our funding, it doesn't create new money. It creates, different ideas of bonds, for example, as the Scottish Government want to use as well as a different type of funding. It doesn't necessarily increase the amount of funding because our borrowing limits are capped.
Yeah. What do you think about a publicly owned freight operator? Is that something that Scottish Government has a view on, or be quite
Well,
content with the ScotRail Cali Sleeper as the public ownership right now?
Yeah,
Does it stop there?
Yeah, so I can give you my view, and I'm a minister for a few weeks left, and I think we should be open to that. But I don't think it would be probably appropriate for me to tie the hands of a future government minister who may want to make choices in this area.
Okay.
But it's obviously it leaves it open for that possibility.
Okay, and then the rolling stock companies.
Well, that's where we're saying in terms of you need to have a different way of funding arrangements, and that's where the issue of how much you can borrow in order to do a different form of funding. And again, it's not necessarily to do with the bill, but I'm keen on looking at Eurofima, which is a cheaper way of funding. The green bond suggestion is a good suggestion, but again is limited by how much we can borrow. So don't think that it's a magic bullet. It could only work if we actually had far more fiscal powers than we currently have.
Yeah, and obviously the limits of devolution.
Yeah,
in there.
that's not for the legislation. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. Yeah, Michael.
Yep. Can I maybe just ask, just for a couple of points of clarification? You mentioned that in your opening comments, the creation of a new infrastructure funding mechanism for GBR on rail infrastructure. Is the intention that with the creation of GBR that for infrastructure, rail infrastructure investment in the future, it will still be through the CP process as we have at the present time, but there will be a different way in which that will operate? Or is it a completely different arrangement from the existing CP arrangements? I
will bring Bill in on the detail of this, but remember, we're currently funding £4.2 billion in the current CP arrangements. The new arrangements means that in terms of that we fund and set strategy for, which is what we currently do, we would actually be able to have direction and guidance. And indeed, that's the whole point of the bill. Will change that relationship with the ORR. The ORR will still have a role, but we will actually have a stronger role in terms of how that can be how that can be set. And I think from an accountability point of view, that's really, really important, because once that CP 7 has been agreed, that we then have to rely on the ORR to be monitoring that, to make sure the delivery is at pace and to level that we have. In terms of why I'm keen that we do provide letters of consent as a Parliament, that's one of the significant changes that is within the bill that would actually allow and enhance Scottish Government ministers' powers precisely over that. But CP7s would cease to, I suppose it would be, the control period I think they're anticipating wouldn't actually be as a control period itself. It will become folded into the new operation of GBR Rail, giving us more powers over the areas which we fund, set strategy for, etc.
Just building on that, Cabinet Secretary, so there will still be 5-year funding settlements for the infrastructure. However, fundamentally, at the moment, we issue a specification and an indication of funding, and the ORR determines how much we should pay. And then, even if Network Rail were not to deliver what we were paying for, we have no accountability mechanisms for redress at the minute. The important change here is that there will still be a 5-year funding settlement. We'll still need to issue our specification and an indication of our funding. The ORR will advise on how much that specification should cost and how efficient Network Rail or GBR should be, but it will be for governments to decide on the level that's appropriate for that 5-year period, and there will then be accountability mechanisms that would allow us to hold GBR to account in Scotland for its performance against that delivery. So it's really a transfer of powers from the ORR to the Scottish Government for that very substantial amount of funding, which I know from your previous experience, Mr. Matheson, you'll appreciate we had limited authority over, despite the vast amounts being expended.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, and I think that's. I was just trying to clarify whether we're also going to have a 5-year period like an existing CP arrangement, so we've got a clear line of sight of what the infrastructure investment looks like and what that profile looks like, which I think is important for the industry to understand that as well, and many of those that are involved in the civil engineering side that operate in a railway network. And my second point, just seeking clarification as well, is that, because I may have missed this, is that given that both we're operating both ScotRail and the Caledonia Sleeper under OLR arrangements, under the new structure, will you be able to step out of those using those pillars, or will it just be a continuation of the use of those pillars?
So that was determined by previous legislation that the committee looked at in the public ownership legislation that was passed in the summer. So that strengthens the position in regard to the ownership using that piece of legislation. What was left outstanding, and is why, if it is possible, and I know the committee is in a very limited time and a lot of pressure in terms of the work you've got, the supplementary LCM precisely addresses what was left out from the public ownership aspect, and I think is needed for both that piece of legislation and this piece of legislation, is that making sure that we, and indeed the UK Government, have powers in relation to transfer of assets at the end of a period of ownership or a change of decision, whatever that decision might be by a future government.
Okay, thanks.
Douglas.
To come back in after the Deputy Convener's questions, and I'm thinking of a real-life example in my head. And so Inverurie Station at present, there's issues around disability access. And I'm just trying to think, going forward, who would be responsible to make sure that that disability access was put in place? Would that rest with GBR, or would the Scottish Government then have a, would they be calling on them to do that? How would it work in practice?
So frustratingly, access and equalities was one of the, we thought, quite a simple thing that could get transferred, but they've decided to keep that within the UK reserved areas. So I'm afraid that we can certainly do what we can in terms of ScotRail services and trying to have better planned integration of when works are being done, make sure the access and accessibility and equalities issues are addressed at the same time. So actually the more integration will help us, but we still don't have the powers that we think we should have in terms of straightforward things like access and those issues.
So that was that will still rest with the UK Government then, is that?
You want to?
It's not specifically railway accessibility that rests, but accessibility legislation generally is reserved to the UK. So we did press for this, but unfortunately was not on the table. I think practically, notwithstanding that reserve power, having a more integrated railway body in Scotland, whatever of the options we do determine on after analysis, I think will allow us to ensure that accessibility is in with the bricks of our specification, will allow us to ensure that we are getting improvements wherever we can as part of the normal business of the railway in an integrated fashion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think who I lobby going forward, Cabinet Secretary, whether it's yourself or whether it's the UK Government. Probably
both. We could probably do a better and improved service, but actually can't do as much as we'd like to do had we got more.
Okay, thank you.
Secretary, because she might not be here in the next Parliament on the basis I don't think you're standing, are you, Cabinet Secretary? Your successor, whoever that may be. Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and we'll consider the evidence that we've heard in private later, and that will allow us to inform our report, which we'll put to the Parliament. I'm briefly going to suspend the meeting to allow a changeover of witnesses.
And thank you so much for your cooperation in taking the evidence on this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back to this meeting of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. This is our third item of business. Third item is an evidence session with Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow. Today's session is our final opportunity before dissolution to examine the progress of the delivery of MV Glen Rosa and to discuss current issues relating to the MV Glen Sannox. We'll also consider the announcement that the Scottish Government plans to directly award contracts for further vessels to Ferguson Marine. Now, I have to say, from my point of view, it's a culmination of 10 years of looking at these ferries, the Glen Rosa and Glen Sannox, none of which have been particularly great as far as delivery is concerned. So I'm going to welcome Duncan Anderson, who's the Chair, Graham Thompson, the Chief Executive Officer, and David Dishorn, who's the Chief Financial Officer. Thank you for attending this morning. Says I've got to congratulate Duncan on his appointment as Chair. I'm not sure whether the congratulations will last for more than a year, but we'll see. But you want to give an opening statement, Duncan? No, we can't hear you yet. Hold on. Let's just wait till I get the nod.
Is
Can
that
you say,
better?
Yes, it's definitely better because we can hear you. So, Duncan, off you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thanks, convener. As you pointed out, I'm the recently appointed chairman of Ferguson's. I joined as a non-executive director in March of last year, and while we're here to talk about the ferries Glen Sannox and Glen Rosa, it is probably also worth pointing out the potential of this shipyard as a new chairman on the Clyde, where it could, with an effective modernisation programme and improved build processes, could be a leader in the industry. It may not seem like that now, but it's entirely possible. The past management of vessel construction has involved mistakes, largely due to poor or outdated shipbuilding techniques used over several decades. The staff have remained hardworking and dedicated to their jobs, which is remarkable in my view, despite being driven to these poor practices and without a clear future for the yard prior to recent announcements. Having said that, the governance and management of those workers' tasks has been very poor indeed in the past, and it appears we have built the ships twice. The logic and sequencing of work packs and processes was historically poorly thought out and poorly implemented. This has been and will be our main challenge on Glen Rosa until our delivery, seeking to dismantle these poor practices and implementing new ones while trying to keep the workforce clear in processes and tasks. With the appointment of a new senior management team, I've seen considerable changes in the yard and much improvement, but decades-old problems and neglect of support for commercial shipbuilding in the United Kingdom can't be repaired in months. It will take years. There is a shortage of trained and experienced workers and subcontractors in the shipbuilding business environment in general. Indeed, the shipbuilding sector across the UK has brought in a considerable amount of foreign labour to compensate for this. Ferguson Shipyard, however, remains committed to train and develop young people of Inverclyde and beyond. The processes I see and the onboard build management of Glen Rosa have improved a great deal in recent months, but we remain in recovery mode for the build, with a hull that has been in the water alongside too long and machinery that has been dormant in the vessel that should have been commissioned a long time ago. Having said that, we are getting over these challenges. We are powering up the switchboards as we speak, and we are close to full engine commissioning as per the recent schedule. So the last of that long-term legacy is being overcome. We look forward to delivery in the fourth quarter of this year while moving forward into our modernisation programme and working on the new vessel projects recently announced in Parliament. We will turn FMPG into an efficient and profitable shipyard that both supports the local community as well as the resurgence of commercial shipbuilding in Scotland, and into a business that people can again be proud of. Thanks for the opportunity to make the statement, Mr. Convener, and Graham, David and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Now, excuse me if I start off by saying that's the third time I've had that speech. I heard it when I went to Clyde Blowers. I heard it when I listened to Tim Hare. and I heard it with Graham's predecessor. Each of them are almost exactly the same. But I want to go back, if I may, and start off with just by saying that in the last session, the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee charged Ferguson Marine to update the committee on the build of the Glen Rosa and Glen Sannox. And that's been passed on to this committee, who is the logical successor. I have to say that the reports that were delivered to the committee over a period of time got progressively weaker and thinner and more off timescale. In fact, it resulted in a letter on the 2nd of April from this committee to Ferguson Marine. David Dishon, I think you dealt with it. And basically, we then got a holding response telling us that Graham was in post, and that until Graham was in post, we couldn't get a report or a full report because it would be unfair on Graham. And then there seems to be some speculation in the press about who authorised and suggested that. But we then got a response on the 13th of May last year, which was written by you, Graham, once you'd had a chance to get your feet under the desk to work out entirely what the situation was. And your report was fairly upbeat, if I could suggest, in your letter. And in the third last paragraph, you said that we'll be on time and costs will increase to 172 million with a 12.5 contingency. And then when we got to this year, we were told in January that the costs would be increased to 197.5 million and delivery wouldn't be on time. Graham, I have to say, what am I to believe? Everything changes. Seems like quicksand. And I have to say, the frustration for me, having been looking at this for 10 years, is huge. So do you want to explain why you got your letter of the 13th of May so fundamentally wrong, i.e. the wrong price and the wrong delivery date?
Certainly, I think what I would say in two parts is, one, in the letter on the 13th, then the diligence I applied to both reviewing the schedule and the cost was done in a manner aware that there was an appetite and a keenness to see a response on where the schedule had gone to and the cost has gone to, as requested by the committee. So the review I did was to check the logic, check the flow of analysis, check how the budget was developed. And in my 8 days in post, then that had a logic that I would follow, a logic I would understand, an approach that I think was appropriate, at the level it was appropriate for the 8 days I had in post, to say that I was satisfied that the work that had been done was sound based on the information I was presented with. So therefore, I did have a confidence that that was a good, rigorous process to develop. Subsequently, as I've got familiar with the yard and spent months working in the yard, then it became evident that there were some systemic issues and some latent issues that prevailed within the business that need to be addressed. And I've made a number of changes, which I'm happy to talk about separately, to address those latent issues and those systemic issues. Fundamentally, though, what has caused the schedule to move now is when we went into dry dock, as we planned to in July and August 25, we identified that we had seen excessive and beyond recognised corrosion in the stern tube and on the hull, brought around mainly in part from being stagnant in the water for the length of time it has been, which is an issue in itself, I understand, and also the quality of the cathodic protection that we had put on around the vessel at that time. So that identified that we had to do a recovery action. That window wasn't available within the dry dock we had in July and August. Therefore, we had to then assess the full scope, had to understand how it would fit in a future schedule that we'd have to develop, and also then align both the availability of the specialist subcontractor to address this issue and identify a dry dock that would be available for us. Having then done that and identified a dry dock, we noticed that we were aware that it was going to be later than the end of Q2. It was going to be in July, August, we'd get the window. And so we then set about saying, how do we minimise the impact of that, and did a very deep dive into the schedule and every aspect of it to see what we could do to optimise the schedule. As we went through that work, we identified that between system installation and commissioning execution, which is where we start to work the live systems, we recognised that there was a disconnect at the very low level within the plan that said that needs to be corrected as well. Compounding that was we aren't able to put liquid natural gas on the ship before it goes into dry dock for good safety reasons. So therefore that then affected the liquid nitrogen gas commissioning as well. All those elements pulled together, that was the availability of the specialist subcontractor for doing the repair in the dry dock, the availability of the dry dock, the extended window we had, the rework on the commissioning schedule to align with system installation, and also the fact we had to delay LNG because we couldn't have that on the ship when we went to dry dock, compounded to create the challenge that moved the schedule, unfortunately, into Q4. And that's where we came to. So the root of this was fundamentally a corrosion issue in the stern tube and the hull, which is, as I say, there's lessons learned from that for ourselves on how we protect the hull better. But equally as well, then we have to recognise that that must be repaired before we hand the ship over. That then led to analysis on the cost. And David then led the work to do the analysis on the cost. And we looked at what we could do to ensure that we covered the scope. We recognise that there's going to be an additional cost because the fact that the ship will be there longer, between insurance, utilities and other aspects associated with running the business. And that compounded to give us the cost that we unfortunately had to then share in January. Okay.
So my problem is, Graham, is that there were 8 months since you wrote that letter in May to when we found out that the cost had gone up and there was a delay. Now, I have to say, 8 months to work that out from when you've got your feet under the desk seems a huge amount of time. Does it not? Well, it does to me. If I was running a business, I'd be seriously concerned that it took 8 months to work that out, that there were problems.
Up until we went into dry dock in July and August, we were still sitting within Q2 schedule. So therefore, we were having some issues with the challenge, some challenge in the schedule, but we were still sitting within that window. When we went into dry dock and discovered the corrosion, a specific issue, that is what then set Leicester to reconvene, to reassess the schedule. And in doing so, then, yeah, we found one more latent issue within the schedule. So the 8 months we had been working on, we were reporting and continuing to report that we were going to make Q2 and we were looking reasonable for the budget.
Okay, so in August you went into dry dock.
Yeah.
So you must have got a report pretty quickly from dry dock, I would have thought. Probably would have gone down and looked at it myself if it was my boat. That still allows 4 months to work out that there's an increase in price before the committee got notified.
So in the 4 months of that time, from August, we then got the report. We then looked at what we originally thought was going to be hull paint recovery and stern tube remediation would be done in parallel. That was the first step along the way to try and identify the scope of what we'd need to do in the dry dock. Subsequently, we then got an analysis that said these couldn't be done in parallel, these be done in sequence, and that was a key part of understanding the scope. Once we know the scope, we then know the duration we need in a dry dock. We've then got to go and actually identify a dry dock that's available for us in the window that's already pre-booked. We don't have a dry dock at Ferguson Marine. And also in time, then we have to actually identify a specialist subcontractor who will come in and do the machining of the stern tube to recover the corrosion.
Okay.
So bringing those together was what
but
the
Graham,
journey
you
was.
wrote to the committee on the 15th of September and told me that the significant milestones or the committee have been met and there was increased confidence in the delivery timetable. The project remains within the £85 million budget and you basically said everything was fine. Don't worry about it. When you must have known at that stage, if it had been dry docked in August, there were significant issues. You've admitted that yourself.
Yeah, in August then we hadn't understood the scope. We thought we could do it in parallel and we thought we could contain it within a week or two and we were looking for a dry dock. So that was the part that says we hadn't actually worked out the scope. The information we had in front of us at that point in time says it was still potentially possible if we found a dry dock and a shortened window, we could contain it.
But the price would go up.
So
something in that 15th of September update to the committee was fundamentally flawed, wrong. It was either the price was going to remain the same and it was going to be delivered on time, or the price wasn't going to be remained and it could be delivered on time. Well, you know, you've said something to the committee which is fundamentally wrong.
The information I had at the time, I believe that letter was correct. That we could contain it, and until we'd actually done the work and analysis to fully scope out the recovery actions for the corrosion, and we were on the track that originally told us that we could contain it within the schedule and the cost, that's why I made that statement. So I was comfortable on the 15th of September to state what I said.
Were you comfortable on the 15th of October?
No, because I started then at that point to understand the
Do
scope
you not
of it.
think it would have been appropriate to let the committee know that the letter you'd written to them in September was factually incorrect?
I think it was appropriate that I actually did the work so I could fully inform the committee of what was the impact, because at that point we were still assessing what it was, and that's where my focus was.
So when did you complete that work?
I completed that work at the end of November.
Wow. Well, to me, it seems to be a bit of a guddle, especially in the fact that when you look at some of the evidence you said that regarding LNG, you must have known LNG couldn't be stored at either place when you started down this thing, but you'd factored on the fact that you could.
No, we knew LNG couldn't go in there. Originally, our schedule was we were going to dry dock in March, and we're going to dry dock in March, and the LNG transit would happen after that between there and in Q2. Originally, when we actually looked at the scope and we thought we could contain it within less than 2 weeks, we had a potential of a dry dock in April, and therefore that's when we started to look at the commissioning schedule. When we got the full scope and saw we needed about 4 weeks for dry dock and that there's commissioning issues along with commissioning system installation, that led to a full bottom-up review of the schedule from a very low level of detail, and that's what took us the time to get to a point on the end of November to say we understand now what the schedule would be, and then prepared some analysis and some cross-challenge and got some other people in to look at the schedule, see what we could do to try and bring it back. And subsequent to that, we wrote the letter knowing we still had the cost to work up, which we provided in January 26.
Okay, so the 30th of January, are you confident that those details that you gave in that letter, that there would be no additional costs above the increased cost to £197.5 million will be exceeded, and that the ferry will be delivered in Q4?
I have a high confidence in both the number and the schedule for Q4 26, but I don't think any CEO dealing with a complex vessel like this would be able to give a guarantee just now. We will work through and manage our risks to look to secure a Q4 delivery and within the budget. But high confidence is where we are just now, and that's what we're working to.
Well, I have to say, that doesn't fill me with confidence. It doesn't fill me with any confidence at all. I've heard, again, that same thing given, and we've ended up with increased costs. What we know is from the insurance figures that I think it's CalMac have insured the Glen Sannox. They've insured it for £57 million. That's the cost it would cost to rebuild it, the rebuild cost. We're already up to £197.5 million on the Glen Rosa, which is, by anyone's calculations, about 4 times what it should have cost, and we still don't know that it'll be delivered. I have to say that in some ways I'll be glad when I leave this Parliament and I don't have to continue to listen to this, because I'm not convinced by any of the arguments you've given. And I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to move to Michael, the Deputy Convener, to ask his questions.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. I want to turn to some of the issues with the Glen Sannox. It's now had to have emergency repairs carried out on 2 occasions, I believe, associated with cracks in its hull. Could you just clarify, do you know what the cause of the cracks are, and are the repairs which have now been carried out permanent repairs in resolving the issue?
The crack that was identified was a 20mm crack, which manifested itself through the vibration through the hull caused when the ship went astern due to propeller cavitation, which the bubbles come off the tips of propellers, vibrating the hull and causing the crack. So yes, as soon as it was identified, then the right thing to do was bring it into dry dock and repair that crack in the first instance. And then the analysis that we've done identified 2 things. Primarily that, well, one thing, there was a root cause, but 2 solutions. The root cause was the excessive cavitation, as it's called, the bubbles coming off the blades of the propellers. And the other part then was identifying what could we do while we did the analysis of propellers to mitigate the vibration. So the mitigation of the vibration in the first step in the solution was to add additional steel, which we did at Glen Sannox when it was in dry dock just over Christmas there. Which was to then offset the vibration issue to prevent any further cracks in the hull. And then the other part of it that we did was then start the analysis and design analysis with our specialist subcontractor on the propeller design. We've now concluded that work on the propeller design, just finished the last week of the design and how we can optimise the time, and that's identified that there is an opportunity to improve the design of the propellers, reduce significantly the cavitation on there, and therefore offset the cavitation in the stern mode, which then, between the steel that we've installed now and the updated propellers, then we'll have a solution that this won't happen again.
Okay. And the changes that will be made to the propellers, what's the time frame for that being carried out now?
That's now, the process we've gone through, we've done the design, we've gone to an independent expert again to validate that design. We've now done a tank test on it, which is basically in Austria. We've got a tank test on to confirm this time this is definitely a solution. That is just concluded. We're now going back to the supplier that did the original design, and we're pushing them to get a schedule of when we will get new propellers. At the moment, it's looking approximately 6 months, but that's our guide of typically what propellers take. We understand the issue that's around this now, and therefore push and try and get as quickly as we can, both for Glen Sannox and to get it available for Glen Rosa.
I presume these changes are having to be carried out under warranty. So are the costs associated with dealing with the cracks and also the work to identify a change in propeller are being incurred by yourselves?
Yes.
Right, and what's the cost associated with these?
David, do you want to?
For all the propellers and the steel strengthening?
Well, the propellers are to do with the Glen Sannox and the replacement of them.
The Glen Sannox warranty for recent dry dock.
Are the cost for all propellers?
Yeah, the recent dry dock and for propellers and steel strengthening is just over £1 million.
Okay. And are the lessons that you've learned from the Glen Sannox being applied to the Glen Rosa?
Yes. As of now, so when the Glen Sannox came up from Camel Laird just last week, we had trials on board. The steelwork that was installed there on Glen Sannox has proven to mitigate the vibration. Doesn't take the root cause away, which are the propellers. So we've now commenced fitting that steelwork on Glen Rosa as well, in preparation for the mitigation of the steel, and also then to get us the opportunity to get the propellers installed when they are available.
Okay, so I presume if it's about £1 million then for the Glen Sannox, it'll be a similar additional cost for the Glen Rosa to this work carried out?
Sorry. Yeah, it will be slightly less.
Okay.
Because we're obviously doing a separate work in Camel Laird for Glen Sannox, so it will be less than that when we get round to doing it for Glen Rosa.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, can you just clarify that? Just say, for argument's sake, what's £500,000 in the big scheme of things? Just say it's £1.5 million between the Glen Rosa and the Glen Sannox. Who's going to pay that? Where does that?
Could you try again?
Gosh, how very annoying. And I don't know why that happened. Siri's a wonderful thing. I don't understand why that works on silence. But just to explain to me, who's going to pay that £1.5 million?
Ultimately, Scottish Government.
So the taxpayers of Scotland?
Correct.
Right. So is that in the extra £500,000 or whatever it is for the Glen Rosa? Is that in the 197.5?
That's included in the risk element.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you. More for the taxpayers. Douglas.
It's not really a risk anymore, though, is it?
It'll be a risk that crystallises.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, okay.
But at the time that we were doing it, we didn't know that, so it's included in the risk.
Right, okay. Can I just ask, in terms of the Glen Sannox, excuse me for not knowing this, but is it back out working again just now, or?
Sorry, say that again.
Is it back out working, or is it still tied up? Or?
No, it's still tied up. But this issue's worked, so I think I'd have to call on CalMac to explain why it's still tied up. We've cleared the work we have.
But will it still be out of service for 6 months until this propellers are changed?
No. The vibration, the issue in the additional steel has taken away the vibration down the hull, which should then negate any recurrence of the crack that was seen previously. Therefore, it can go back into service. But to get to the root cause of the issue and fix it is to fit new propellers.
Okay, so the fact it's not out for service is really a CalMac issue?
Yeah, we're not aware of any reason that's stopping it. Right,
okay. And can I just check, has there been any issues with the LNG side of things for Glen Sannox and Glen Rosa?
So Glen Rosa, if I take that first, we're just finishing the installation of LNG pipeworks now in readiness to go and start, when we can, safely start doing the installation and commissioning and setting to work of that system. In terms of Glen Sannock, I'm not sure of the utilisation that's been made of the LNG during its sailings. We are aware of one safety improvement that's been brought to our attention, which we've now adopted on Sannox and are implementing on Glen Rosa. It did pass all the safety requirements, but in operation, based on the direction of wind, in a certain instance, we should get some flow back of LNG fumes. So we have now corrected that in Sannox, and we'll correct that on Glen Rosa.
Okay, but you don't know if it's been used extensively or not?
I do not know.
Okay. There's been reports that there was obviously parts stripped from Glen Rosa to get the Glen Sannox back up and working. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so, excuse me, as I understand, when Glen Sannox was going through its setting to work and then its trials, then for the efficiency is taking material off Glen Rosa to Glen Sannox to make sure rapid response to any defects or changes. That has been done. When I came in, one of the first things we did was actually take a full analysis of all the material state of the ship and also the material we had within the warehouse and what we had in order to satisfy ourselves that we didn't anticipate any other materials coming up, that we could order material in the timeline needed and the lead time needed to be available at that point in the activity in the schedule. So having gone through all of that, we've got a position now that we are content we have the material we need to complete Glen Rosa. And we are also then doing an analysis on do we anticipate it, because we carry the same risk that Glen Sannock does, we could go to the point of setting to work and find that something that should work doesn't. So therefore, we have to be in a position that we understand where we can go to our suppliers and the speed of their response for that material, and also the fact that we have purchased a number of spares as part of our contract to provide to CMAL and to CalMac, that might be another route for us to recover should we find a defect in some piece of equipment.
So is the parts that's been stripped off of Glen Rosa, has that been accounted for as part of the Glen Rosa 197.5, or is that accounted for in terms of repairs for Glen Sannox? How do you account for that?
Do you want to?
It's accounted for in, so the original part that was bought for Glen Rosa and put on Glen Rosa would be on Glen Rosa, charged to that. If we've taken anything off Glen Rosa to put on to Glen Sannox, then that's charged to Glen Sannox under the warranty.
And also, I guess, the time for people to take it off of Glen Rosa.
Correct. It's fully absorbed. Yeah.
And I guess that will be also for then refitting it back to Glen Rosa once a spare arrives.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm just trying to think whether there's... And does this cause any delay for the Glen Rosa? Because obviously we're only talking about Q4 9 months away now. Will any of this stripping parts off Glen Rosa to put onto Glen Sannox, is that going to impact the timescales that we're looking at?
No, so what we have is, say, done the analysis, we have all the material we need available now, or we know we will get it in a timeline to suit the activities that consume that material as we execute Glen Rosa. The risk we have on Glen Rosa is the risk that manifests itself in Glen Sannox is that when we turn something on, it doesn't work. It's been lying on the shelf, or it's been on the ship for a number of years and it doesn't work. So despite the fact of maintenance and checks, it's not until you put something live, whether pressure or power, that you find doesn't work. Yeah. So we carry that risk, and that's one of the risks we've accounted for. That is there on every ship. It's not just Glen Rosa and Glen Sannox, on every ship, and that's what we've accounted for in terms of the reason of the high confidence going forward. Is we've done all we can to try and mitigate it, but it is one of the risks we carry going forward, that when we get into full commissioning, we do have the potential that some of the material may not, some of the equipment might not work, and at which point then we have to say how the speed of response of our supplier, or from spares, or from our own stock, that we can take something from somewhere else in the ship and make that work.
But I guess if it was completed back to its original timescale, if something like that happened, you would have been able to go back to the manufacturer and say, look, this is not working. We can't do that anymore, can we? I would imagine everything's out of warranty.
Yeah, they're out of warranty. It doesn't. We would still have to go and get the material. Yes, we still have to go and get it. But yeah, we would go back to the supplier. It would be under their warranty if it was within timescale. Yes.
And have you got any risk provision put in for things that are no longer under warranty, not working? So you have to spend how much?
As part of the $5.5 million and the $197.5 million, we've got risks for delays, but we've also got obsolete materials, or anything that is missing materials, or anything that we have to take out. So yeah, there's an element there for obsolete.
Yeah, and you touched on how much spares do you actually carry for both vessels then in the yard?
Yeah. The spares we carry are actually defined by the contract, so we provide those spares. We don't carry spares particularly. Right, okay. What we were doing is trying to make sure that we understand if for equipment going, excuse me, for equipment going forward into commissioning, what is our ability to get a speed of response? Now, we don't know for the thousands of items on there what might fall over, so we've not done that level of analysis, but we do anticipate that we won't, that some equipment will not work effectively, and therefore we need to be good, slick process with our suppliers to work out where we can secure a replacement for it, whether it's from that supplier, whether it's from CalMac, we can go to CalMac and ask if we can get one of their spares, which is typical on Elasticlast in any programme I've worked on, is an option to go there. And the third part is then trying to recognise whether it's something that can be recognised a defect if we haven't got it completed by the time we want to deliver the ship.
Okay. And last question, has there been any issues with spares going missing just because it's been such a long period of time?
No, not with any of the record of that, no. We moved from Glenrose to Glensannox, then, yeah, our analysis we did when I first joined flushed out that although the item was missing, we couldn't track the paperwork for it. So there may have been decisions made in the previous management to move something across for expediency and executing Glensannox. We've now identified that either with paperwork or identify it as a gap and then create the paperwork to secure a new piece of material.
Okay. Because I thought, David, you maybe said, things had gone missing, but...
No, I'm saying if we then, by the time we get to delivering Glenrosa, if we then find that something is missing, it's not in the warehouse, or if it's obsolete, then we've put a...
Okay. Duncan, did you want to come in? I noticed your hand's up.
Yes, thanks. There's a few points, or 3 points actually, I'd like to mention that the convener said earlier on. The first one is, he has rightly been concerned with what's gone on in the past. But frankly, the new management team we're not time travellers. Looking back and looking at what's gone on with the predecessors isn't really the concern of taking the yard forward. That's the first point I'd make. The second point is, with Graham's taking time to look at the actual process. I myself I've been visiting the ship every month. I was in the dry dock in August. In any shipyard that immediately picks up the phone and say there's going to be a delay, without knowing how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, would be negligent in their duties. So we took our time. We decided to do it properly and came back with a forecast for taking the build forward. The third point I would make is the 57 million rebuild cost. There's no relation to a new build cost of a vessel. I've been either working for a shipyard or more often a ship operator my whole life. And people very often underinsure to keep the premium down. So that ship would be well in excess of 100 million if you built it now, while I do accept we're hugely over budget. So I thought that it would be prudent for me to make those points. Thanks.
And thank you for clarifying that I need to go back to CalMac and ask why they're under-insuring a vessel that belongs to the people of Scotland, which is effectively what you've said.
Well, I would challenge you to go out and get a price of 57 million.
Well,
and if CalMac were being honest with you, they would tell it the same thing. I'm sorry.
Well, with respect, my family's been in insurance for many years, and I understand when you insure things, you insure them for the costs of replacement. And I asked what the cost of replacement for to CalMac, and they gave me that figure. So I'll definitely question. Sorry, just clarify, Dave, before we move on. What's the total warranty claims on the Glensannox?
At the moment, it's 2.2 million. It'll end up somewhere around about 3 million.
About 3 mil.
Yeah, 3 to 3.2, I would say. It's looking at.
Okay, Michael, I think we're back to you with a question.
Can I turn to the issue that was announced by the government of awarding a direct award to Ferguson Marine of 4 new vessels to be constructed of 3 different designs, I understand, as well. Just given the history here, I wonder what sort of assurances can you give us that you'll be able to deliver these vessels at what would be considered to be a reasonable market rate for a vessel of this type, given our previous experience?
I think there should be 2 parts to that, and if I can maybe take the last part first. The process we've gone through in terms of assessing what we would potentially be able to build those vessels for. We ran a number of scenarios or a number of vessels, and we prepared that for the Scottish Government at their request. We have done that on the basis of what we think we would do it for. The Government, I understand, is doing an assessment of what the market would expect to pay for those vessels. In terms of going out to an order, and that ultimately is the constituent part of the subsidy case. So we're in a position now where we know we won't be as efficient as the current modern shipyards across the UK and across internationally now. That's the journey we need to go on. So that does get a point that we do have a recognition that we have a cost efficiency curve to come down and improve on. But that's the base of why that's going through the subsidy case. In terms of those vessels as well, then we have built those 2 Marine Scotland vessels before. We did originally build those. The ones that are in operation just now. We have done ferries. A third of the Calmac ferry fleet was built at Ferguson Marine. So none of this particularly phases us, and they have been different classes of vessel. What we have recognised is that for us to manage a portfolio, the organisation structure that I've put in place is something that's scalable to manage a portfolio of different classes of vessel, which will all be at different phases we go through the next 5 years. Some will be coming through design, some will be in build, some will be in commissioning. So we've structured an organisation that allows us to do that. We will augment the capability within the organisation, and equally as well, we know what our strengths are, although we've not demonstrated that particularly in the last 10 years. We know what our strengths are as a capability. We will build on that, and where we know we need to go out to subcontractors and specialist support, we will go and do that and manage them as major subcontracts to execute the work they have to support us. And in my mind, I'm particularly thinking about the Marine Scotland research vessel. The mission system that's on there, it's typical to go out to a specialist company that does that kind of work. They will do the design, we will support the installation, they will do the sets work and commissioning. So therefore we allocate out risk appropriate to people that are domain experts in their area, and we place a contract with them and the risk with them to manage that integration. So that's how we'll manage the class. And you're right, we go through 3 classes of vessel. But as I say, we've been through that before and what we've done previously with Marine Scotland and with ferries. So we will manage that in the same manner, which we've done in the past successfully.
Okay, so you sound quite confident on this. Can I just ask you then, just as a CEO at Ferguson Marine, what gives you the level of confidence that you have a management structure in place now that's capable and able of delivering these vessels on budget, on time, and to the spec that is required?
So I think if I look back in the 10 months I've been in and talk about the changes that's happened. So we have, in terms of programme management, programme controls, we've implemented a much more robust planning process now, which has uncovered some of the challenges we're talking about at the moment. But that robust planning process gives us a level of fidelity analysis we can now do, which wasn't there to the depth I would like it and is now there to the depth I would like it. We run earned value management systems, we run cost accounts, we are training control account managers. These are all typical good practice programme management approaches to take in running a programme of this complexity. So we've put that in place. We've also backed that up with bringing a general manager programme management to support that. I've also brought in a ship delivery director to manage the execution of Glen Rosa, and we will do something similar going forward for all these vessels to drive delivery. On top of that, then, we have driven a message of accountability, ownership and scope understanding. We've done that on Glen Rosa and driving it on Glen Rosa, and it's still that curve we're on. That's what we'll do from the start. I think the fundamental thing that we'll do differently, though, is we'll start with good practice from day one in the programme. So as I look back and I do my understanding of how we moved into the build of Glen Stannis and Glen Rosa, it listed in there a number of issues which I would not have taken on as a shipbuilder. And I would have approached it quite differently if I had done that. Therefore, I got asked in a previous committee, what's your lessons learned from Glen Stannis and Glen Rosa? My commentary is much more fundamental. It's not even lessons learned in the main practice. It's just apply good, solid shipbuilding practice. And there's plenty of that we can bring, that we will bring to Ferguson Marine and started now. And therefore, I have a confidence that to go forward these vessels, then there's a lot of good practice that we can bring into place and mobilise now to ensure that we get into a position that we start the programme well. Programmes of complexity are always a challenge. And the basics is if you start well, it doesn't mean you get better. You start well and try and maintain that. But the challenge you'll have is always in every programme I've worked on, I've been in shipbuilding for 40 years, is even starting well, you've got a challenge of maintaining that momentum. And this is around 3 parts in my mind. One is the contract's the right contract, the requirements are understood, and that's where I've had discussions in the last day, even with Scottish Government, about getting close on the contract term for these future ships and what the requirements are to ensure we get alignment and we don't do an over-the-wall situation as get handed this. We engage proactively and understand how we start well. We mobilise well, which is really saying before we actually pick up calculators or burning torches, we understand what the scope is, we understand how to mobilise, we understand how to execute it, we understand our make-buy strategy, and we understand our programme management and controls that are going to do it. And then the last part is getting delivery. If you've done those first two parts well, you're off to a very good start on a programme.
Okay. So can I turn to Duncan? So we've got an executive team that appear to be confident in being able and capable of actually delivering on these 4 vessels. And having processes in place that can help to deliver them at a market rate on time as well to the spec that they require. You've been a non-executive member of the board and you're now chair of the board. What are you as a board doing differently to give us assurance that you have robust, effective oversight of your executive team in delivering on the commitments they're making?
I mean, I think as a board, we're very close to management and still have have enough distance and oversight to look after the overall direction that they're going into. One of the important things is that we are replacing myself, I think, in the near future with another board member. My own personal opinion was there wasn't enough experience on either shipyards or shipping on the board. We've got, from the government's perspective, we have coverage, but we don't have coverage in shipping or shipyard experience. And that's what we aim to improve on. As regards the committee meetings, etc., we're making some changes there on how we get the information and how it feeds into the bi-monthly board meetings. But I think the main issue is that we need to strengthen our experience on the board and the industry that we're in.
So we've got an executive team that are confident. You've been on the board, you're now chair of the board, and the principal factor that you've identified was a weakness in the oversight by the board was a lack of shipbuilding experience. Is that it?
I believe, and I'm talking about over a number of years, it's improved. I believe that my predecessor's NED was a naval architect, for example. But there are 2 issues there. There is one, the experience in shipbuilding or shipping, and the other is in the commercial side. Our main challenge going forward, you've heard the recent good news in Parliament, in that there's a direct award scheme. Ultimately, the shipyard needs to be profitable, whatever the future holds for it. And we need to win, in the future, non-governmental contracts with third parties that become profitable without a subsidy. And we need people on board who can win those contracts, both in ultimately in the management team, but with an oversight from the board. And that's our challenges going forward. But I mean, the current board setup is pretty good. It needs strengthening on the commercial side. I have commercial experience in my career, but I think we need someone else with that background. Okay,
and you're making some process changes in order to help to enhance your oversight as well, is that correct?
Yes, there seems to be, there are certainly enough committee meetings. We have an operations committee, we have the more common, that's not common on a board, but more commonly, of course, you have the REMCOM committee and, of course, the audit committee. But the issue, we had plenty of meetings, we had monthly meetings. The problems I had when I came on board was the quality of the information that we're getting. We don't want, endless bar charts that are a result of the production team. It's what they use anyway. What we want is relevant and more direct board information to allow us to oversee what the management team is doing. And that's what we're moving towards now. And we've already, made some progress in that regard with the information that we're getting from David and Graham.
Okay, thanks.
Ben, I think you've got some questions that you'd like to ask.
Yes, please, Convener, thank you. Mr Thompson, you said earlier that you know what your strengths are. and that you're trying to deal with the weaknesses at this moment. Project management has obviously been a weakness in the past. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
You say that you have strengthened project management. What differences have you made in terms of project management and getting the right people?
So, fundamentally, I've established a programme management office which did not exist before. We have brought in our own planners to that now. Originally, we had subcontracted planners, which left the business last year, and we brought in our own planners now. We have also brought in experienced a general manager of programmes as well, an experienced project manager in the marine industry as well. And we also have actually appointed some what we call production coordinators and trainee project planners. On top of that, then, we have driven hard the adoption of a tool set called Primavera, which is a common programme management planning tool, which gives us the fidelity and analysis we need. We have also implemented a robust risk management process. One of the many governance meetings we have now is a risk management meeting. And we have a risk engineer in supporting us now in developing a comprehensive risk register. On top of that, we have also implemented, as I mentioned earlier, control account management. We have also implemented earned value that we can trust, which is really just the key measure in programme management of cost and schedule performance. It doesn't tell us good news or bad news in many respects, just tell us what the news is, and allows us to make decisions off of that. And equally as well, we have we've implemented other work around resource planning and recruitment as well, including, as I said, looking at a programme management organisation which didn't exist before and is now existing, now populated, and now has a key role in delivery of the future programmes.
So it sounds like you have built up a team of people, which of course will add to costs, but may well save a lot in the future rather than having to deal with mistakes at a later date and doing things and then having to rip them out and then do them again. Can I ask you, in terms of that team, have you brought in folk external from the marine, from the shipbuilding sector, who have project management experience?
Yes, we have.
Could you give us an indication of what those people have maybe done before, what their specialities have been before?
Yeah, in terms of our General Manager programme, which we brought in a contractor at first, and we're just in the transition phase to full-time, but both of them have a very similar background. Both of them worked in the industry, both on the Type 23 frigates, both on the Type 45, both on other complex programmes as well. The one that's coming in was the Programme Planning Director for the Type 31 programme as well, and before that was on the aircraft carrier, so they've got quite depth of marine experience.
So I get the marine experience, and that's grand, but have you taken project management expertise from elsewhere? I'm thinking around about the oil and gas industry, for example, where there is a great knowledge of project management, extremely difficult projects, where there is a lot of pressure to deliver on time and on budget.
Not specifically we've gone out there. We've gone out and recruited, and we're recruiting for planners, as I say, as well, and project controls and project managers. Then we've left the door open. We've not been perhaps perceived as myopic on just they've got to have marine shipbuilding experience. We haven't done that. Those are the people that have demonstrated the greatest capability for doing the work we require, though.
So you're open-minded in that
yes.
front, and obviously I would imagine that you'd be equally open-minded on these folks garnering experience from other project management techniques from out with the marine industry.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. How are you going to ensure that all of the lessons in terms of the project management and everything that is done in that regard actually leads to the right things being done and on-board delivery, if you excuse that pun? Yeah,
so one of the aspects of this is so one of the things that I've experienced 10 months here is trying to make sure people understand their scope. They understand what they've got to do and what they've got to execute. They understand the level of effort it takes, and therefore they understand the cost. So that's what we've done, is breaking that down now through the schedule, establishing everyone as a term as a control account manager, although there might be a production supervisor, production manager, they also called a control account manager. That control account manager comes with the responsibility of understanding the scope, understanding the resources, understanding your risks, and understanding the budget you've got. So we've done a lot of training on that now, so we don't end up in a position that we have one person, someone in the business, holding all the money and everybody else just gets busy and works. People understand to a fairly low level in the organisation going forward what is their scope, risk, schedule, resources, budget, and they will be held accountable to that in terms of their performance at a much lower level in the organisation. And that's how we're going to ensure that people understand their scope, their budget and the time they've got to do the work.
Okay, so you said previously that management and scope understanding is important. You've reiterated that again. In terms of scope understanding, let's move to a specific, because you talked earlier around about the propeller cavitation difficulty that you've come across. And, you know, we come across difficulties from time to time. But one would have thought that in terms of that kind of situation with propeller cavitation, that there would be past experiences and a scope understanding in developing a system where there is no cavitation or little cavitation. Can you give us an indication of how in future you're going to make sure that these kind of things don't come into play?
Well, certainly, some of that is, you're absolutely correct, some of it is a lesson learned, some of it is recognising what was not done that should have been done, and just go back to good practice again. So if we take the propeller example, then the propellers which were developed, I can only imagine 10 years ago, were developed and tested and proven computationally to be without the cavitation level we saw. The lesson learned from that is there wasn't a tank test done 10 years ago, as I understand it, in the Stern mode, which is where we've now seen the issue. So that's a very specific one, and that is not necessarily unusual if you rely on the computational model, but certainly a lesson going forward is what's the modelling we've done. And that's why we did a test this time round on the new design in the Stern mode in a tank before we said in the last week, we now know this solution works.
So basically, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but in terms of as you move forward here, there is going to be a lot more of scope understanding. There's going to be more spent on project management to get things right at the beginning. And by the sounds of what you have just said, there will be much more testing at the beginning rather than some basic testing and missing out other things.
Yeah, I think the part I would add to that one, because particularly that was about subcontracting, is we will now do a full analysis of what is the nature and content of our subcontract contracts to ensure that we are understanding when we put work out, that we have the controls, the measures and the requirements clearly in place, so people who we subcontract to fully understand their scope and what they've got to do. And
will be managed appropriately by the project managers.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Thompson. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Kevin. Now, Mark, I think the questions you wanted to ask may have been dealt with, so I'm going to move to Bob for his questions. I want to come back to the issue of the direct award, but Bob's questions first.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully it's something that's a bit more of a good news story, but it requires scrutiny as well, and that's the £14.2 million the yard has notionally been guaranteed by the Scottish Government over a 2-year period. David, I think you commented on this as long ago as November 2024 to committee, crikey. And you said that it would be used for equipment that's obsolete, to get a shot of it, equipment that's not working to repair it, and equipment needing upgraded. You started to split it into how that could be portioned out. I think you said 4 million for obsolete equipment, about 8 million, probably half of the overall total, pivoting towards making sure the yard was fit for future work. So just put some of that on the record from your evidence.
Yep.
In 2024. Now, if I can find the right bit in my sheet. To date, it says the government has received 11 separate capital expenditure CapEx requests from Ferguson Marine. Following rigorous due diligence, 11 have been improved, a combined total value of £570,000. So
that's
in 2024, everything's relative. Compared to £570,000, huge, substantial potential investments, very clear what that money was to be used for, but to date £570,000. Could you give me an explanation for why it seems to be such a slow process?
Yeah, if you go back to, so although I was here in November 24, it was actually July 24 that I think the Deputy First Minister announced the 14.2 million. What she also said is it had to comply with financial and legal due diligence, which, yes, we did think at that point in time would probably take a few months. It has taken a lot longer than that. And then we, so you're absolutely correct, the 570 is what we have spent so far. Because we haven't gone through the financial and legal due diligence, we were going through a commercial market operator assessment at the time. We can only really spend legally on anything that is a safety implication or is obsolete equipment. So we identified what we think we can spend at that moment in time, and that's been approved by Scottish Government. The rest of the money is very shortly to be spent on upgrading the yard. We couldn't do that at that point in time because we didn't have the legal route to do that. But the direct award helps us now to unlock that capital investment.
Okay, now, I suppose in one respect I'm pleased that so little's been spent to date, because there's no point in sinking money into the yard late 2024 if you're investing in the wrong kit and equipment for the business you want to invest in. But it seemed quite clear in late 2024, I'm not trying to catch out on anything, but £4 million in obsolete equipment. And I think you're suggesting that that's now less than £1 million in obsolete equipment. Is that because some of the obsolete equipment is now no longer part of how you're taking the yard forward?
So you're absolutely correct, and there is no point in spending that money in 2024 and buying the wrong kit. But also there's no point in spending that money if there was no secure future in the yard. So we had to go through that process of spending. This is public funds, so you don't want to spend 14.2 million and then find out you've got no secure future and you're left with a white elephant. One of the lines in that 4 million was a full upgrade of the electrical system. So it's obsolete, but it's not a health and safety implication at the moment. That will be part of the future upgrade as well. So it's just the fact that it's a timing issue. The 14.2 million we've fully mapped out, so we will be starting that very shortly.
Okay, so that 14.2 million is fully mapped out. Is it public information? Is it appropriate to make that public information? There's clearly a will from Parliament to scrutinise, with goodwill, the future of Ferguson Marine, because we want it to prosper, but we're also very conscious, the convener is, of missteps over several years. We want to make sure this £14.2 million secures a future and is not another misstep.
No, absolutely. So we can do that, and we can give you a full breakdown of that. What we have to do is we have to go through Public Contract Scotland to get the tender process. So once that is up and ready, we will give you that information.
Okay, I suppose the core question around all of this, this all kind of context, is, subject to due diligence, how will this investment be used to ensure on time and on budget delivery of the 4 vessels stated in the direct award? So can you bring to life to me and give examples specific to how that investment can give us a degree of reassurance which maybe we previously didn't have at committee?
Yes, so for example, one of the items is a semi-automated panel line, a 13-metre panel line. That is not just the implementation of the panel line, that will be a building upgrade as well. What that will do is that will allow us to be more productive. So if we take our man hours per tonne, for example, that will reduce significantly. There will be a 50% productivity increase in that. So those work practices will then reduce the cost of the build. and those working practices and efficiencies will then allow us to be more competitive again in the future, so that when we get to the end of the 4 vessels and we are in competitive tenders in the open market, we should be in a position, having learned the lessons from doing marine patrol, marine research and SVRP2, we've then learnt how to use that equipment and become more efficient.
Okay, maybe just one final question, Convener. I'm just looking through your previous evidence. It was actually very helpful. Just reading through it just now. Suggested the £14.2 million in much would be almost like a catch-up for the yard, because yards of the nature of Ferguson would be investing as a matter of course over £1 million, possibly much as £2 million, on an annual or a regular basis to make sure it was always fit for the future and ready, be at the cutting edge of being that commercial yard that could win successful, profitable contracts. So I suppose it then begs the question, is once we've invested this £14.2 million, as soon as you install equipment, the day after that, the new piece of kit comes on the horizon for replacing. What is, if you like, the sink fund for replacing as a matter of course once we've done a catch-up, and where does that money come from?
So that 14.2 million will be phase 1. We've done quite substantial research into what an owner of our shipyard should be putting in as capital expenditure, and again I'll use the 1 to 2 million per year. That hadn't happened prior to Scottish Government taking ownership in December 2019, so there was a significant catch-up even for Scottish Government. And then when Scottish Government took over in 2019, you obviously then very quickly, they had to learn what it was about learning, running a shipyard, and then COVID hit, and then you're at the stage where you're looking at potentially selling the shipyard, so you wouldn't want to put capital investment in there. Now they're at a catch-up stage, and realistically it should be about 1 to 2 million every single year going forward on that, just to upgrade. But if you take the panel line, for example, it's not necessarily the new ones coming in and you need to rip everything out and start again. There'll be technical upgrades for that.
Okay, I really hope we get to a stable state with Ferguson Marine in the next few years, and so we get onto a good news story. I just say, I think, Convener, that all of us, including the Convener, despite the terrier-like scrutiny, will want to see the yard successful, profitable and for the public benefit. So thank you for those responses. Okay.
Thank you. And I would agree with that, but just in prior to nationalisation in 2019, if I remember rightly, £30 million in a loan was given to help the yard produce, become more competitive, and then a further £15 million. The two were uninterlinked, £45 million. It appears that money disappeared. No one's quite worked out where. It's a pity it wasn't spent on the yard, I would just say, as an observation. Douglas.
Spoke about a panel line. Is that the same as the plating line that was previously discussed, or?
I'll defer to Graham.
Yes, it's a semi-automated panel line. It's basically large plates. You automate how you process the plate, put the stiffeners on it, weld it, put the penetrations into plate, so when you get to the end of the panel line, you're able to just fold it into a unit or a compartment.
Looking back, I remember a couple of years ago we were told that, I think it was a figure of 25 million, but there was also a really long lead time, if I remember right, on that. And so I guess my question is, can that now be ordered? And if it's not ordered, will that affect the delivery of the 4 new vessels that's been discussed?
2 parts. Yes, we're now, and again, in the last 24 hours, working with the Scottish Government about getting a mechanism to allow us to place the order for the lead, for the equipment, for the panel line. We have engaged with a supplier. They've indicated 12 months to 14 months, but they get a lot of demand, so the sooner we get in and book our manufacturing slot, the better. Keen to do that. What we have said in the analysis we've done on what it would take to build the vessels, then we've made an assumption of we'd have the panel line available for those vessels. So therefore our pricing that we've presented, which may not be market competitive in the first instance, but gets us there, is based on we have the panel line available. Now that means that you would follow that through and say, well, if we've got the order today, then we're not going to have a fully functioning installed panel line till March or April next year. Parallel with that is saying that whatever the first vessel is, and we're assuming at the moment it's a Marine Scotland vessel, then we still have to go through our design and long lead material purchase for the vessel, which is the process of only start building when your design's mature. We know between getting from here to contract, to design, to long lead items for inside the ship, that we expect that will fall just after that March date for the vessels. So we will get the benefit of the panel line, but we have a bit of runway to go.
So at present, you don't really know what you're building because the specification hasn't been done, the design work hasn't been done. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's not unusual in the sense that most often when we get shipbuilding, the ship operator or the procurement agency for the ship operator will provide us with a document of a set of requirements. Occasionally they've got a concept design done, but it is just a concept design. Part of the contract we will do is then go into a detailed functional design, it's called, which is a lot more analysis, a lot more detail in the design. We spec out the size of pumps, the size of engines, the size of ventilation, and start ordering all that equipment. And then laterally we go into a detailed design, which is very bespoke for the ship. So we have a journey to go on, but that's absolutely typical.
So things like how the vessel will be fuelled, whether it's dual fuel again or whether it's just diesel or electric or whatever, that is still to come from the design. You don't know yet how it will be powered.
That will come from the requirements. The requirements that customer specs will say, well, they want it dual fuel, they want to have so many cars on it, they want to, what sensors they want on it to go doing marine research. They define those requirements. We then do the analysis of how could we bring that together as a package on a vessel.
So only at that point then you will have a price that you will be able to give to the Scottish Government, is that correct?
The price evolves. So we will do a price, we've done a price already on what we know. We'll keep on evolving the price and narrowing it down. So typically you'd put in a price that you say, this, on what we understand today, this is our price, but it has this level of variability on it because we don't have that detail. And the intention is to then narrow that band down and to make sure you stay within that band and get to the price, the detailed price.
So it's been a long time, but actually before you have a contract from the Scottish Government to build these 4 vessels. Just now it's only an intention that's going to be coming to yourselves.
Yeah, and at the moment, as I say, we had a discussion with the Scottish Government, we're getting onto contract, and we were keen to speak to the procurement agency to work out how we package this up and how it is packaged up. If it's individual contracts, then we're keen to start the conversation on the first of those vessels as quickly as possible. Along with the contract, we discuss the requirements, and at that point we continue to start refining our price, our scope, our schedule, and understand what material we've got to purchase and the lead time for that material.
Okay, so it'll be a while before we know the timescales of delivery, all these things. That's a lot further down.
It's further down the line, yes.
Thank you.
Sounds like we're not going to repeat the stage where we were building the ferry before the design had been approved.
Definitely not.
Which is where we were, I think, when we started down this scheme with the Rosa and Sanix. Just a couple of questions, if I may. I know Duncan's not particularly happy looking at history, but I remember David Tyman coming in and saying that Ferguson Marine would always be 20 to 25% more expensive than any other yard when it came to building ships. Was that wrong?
Based solely on labour, then I can understand at that time the delta in labour. We should, and definitely should be able to, on all our aspects, be competitive in our efficiency and competitive in the material pricing, which are the 2 areas we need to focus on. If, however, we're going, and convenient as these examples are, Poland and Turkey, if their labour rate's cheaper, we won't compete with that. If that's a deciding factor in the race to price, then we'll have a challenge. We should be wiping our face with Turkey, with Poland, on what they pay for material to what we pay, and we should be just as efficient with them with the investment we're proposing to make.
I'm sorry, I understand that. What I'm trying to work out is what is it going to cost with the labour involved, 20 to 25% more than it would if the ferry was built overseas?
I don't believe so, no.
What do you think is a reasonable figure?
I think it will be 10%.
10, 15?
Yeah.
10's happy with
I
that?
think, and I'm sure this will get played back to me sometime in the future. I'll look forward to that moment.
Well, you'll be glad to know, Graham, it won't be me that's doing it, but somebody will probably come back and ask you to justify that. And is that based on the investment of that the government are making, or is that without that investment?
No, that is with that investment.
Okay, so my next question then is with the contract award that the government has indicated the yard are going to get. You're limited in space in the yard to what you can do at any time because you haven't got a huge amount of space there. Is this going to take up all of 5 years, or will it take longer, considering the limitations on space that you have and equipment there?
No, it'll take about the 5 years, we estimate, and that's really also a part of just when the contracts are let. But you're absolutely correct, at some point you run out of space. But certainly looking at what we're doing now in the investment we've talked about is how do we optimise the space we have. Shipyards traditionally grow organically just in the footprint because they're there for many decades. And therefore, what the journey we'll start on is looking at how do we optimise it so there's a proper production flow, which is then making best use of the space. But yeah, we know if we had 4 slipways and 4 panel lines, we look to resource to try and do them all in parallel. But that's not the way, and you lose lessons learned out of that as well as you go through that learning.
Absolutely. So the space is the limiting factor on what you can do. So you've got this direct award from the government, or you will hopefully get this direct award. You won't be able to take on any other work while that's going on, will you?
That's the analysis we've got to do just now, because, again, taking the point that was said earlier, is we want to get some detail on these ships, understand how we put through our facility and look at the capacity we may have left, if any. Equally, I've been speaking with Inverclyde about, if we do look to expand our footprint, then there is areas, even despite it doesn't look like it, there is areas around the yard just now that we potentially could go into, subject to Inverclyde Council amenable to that. And equally, there is the Inchgreen facility a mile down the road from us as well. I've been clear since I've been in this job that I hope in 5 years' time Port Glasgow isn't big enough, but we actually can expand and spread out more. And that might be Inchgreen, that might be other annexed areas as well. So we can actually get to a point where creating a good, solid shipbuilding commercial industry back in Inverclyde again.
But that area that you need is currently underwater and will need a huge investment to make it into a yard, will it not?
Inchgreen, you're talking about, sorry,
yeah, where you are at the moment, to spread out where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so, well, I might upset some people in Inverclyde just now, but, the part of it is we have a fire station that's in the middle of our yard, which serves the rural community. Can't move that, critically important. There is space in front of the yard just now we can use. It doesn't look much, but it could be sufficiently to actually put another panel line in or other automated equipment.
Okay, it's just that when the government gave their statement the other day, that they said you couldn't be in a position where you couldn't rely on government contracts. You had to have contracts elsewhere as well. And I'm trying to work out in the 5 years you're fairly committed to the government, and then when these are all built, a bit like the Glen Rosa and the Glen Sannox, you come to a bit of a cliff edge because you've not got anything else there. Is that a fear for you?
I'm going to say no to that, because I look at the maritime, the demand for marine vessels just now and the longevity of that demand. As the National Shipbuilding Office reported in 2022, between the UK and devolved governments, there's 150 vessels over the next 30 years. We should be attractive and competitive even within the UK within 5 years to secure that work on a competitive basis. The condition we have that prevails on the direct award is the maximum we can take in when executing the direct award work is only 20% compared to the value of the direct award. So therefore, we might not be constrained by size, we might be constrained by the fact of the nature of the work we can take on. So we don't in any way threaten the delivery of direct award work that's been proposed.
Okay, so just going then to, so I understand a little bit more about the direct award, presumably they'll be on 5 contract payments like most ships are built around the world, will they? Not the 18 that we had for the Sannox and the Glen Rosa.
Yeah, well, I think this is part of why we're trying to get the procurement department to understand. Okay. We want to get engaged and understand that. I've been up front. We don't want to get in a position, as you say, for Glen Rosa and Glen Sannox. But I think the best way to do that is start in that first phase is let's try and make sure whatever contract we establish serves everybody's interests and is the best arrangement for us being successful as an enterprise.
So when would you expect the first payment then to be made?
I would expect it to be made on contract signature. On contract signature, the first payment.
Yeah, when is that?
This is the conversation I had just in 24 hours saying I'm keen to get involved with the procurement, and given what I've just described there about ordering panel line and the lead time for that, etc., then I would really be keen to get to the position of a contract as soon as possible to allow us to mobilise our team of engineers, our supply chain people and our subcontractors.
Okay. David, we've talked in the past when you've been here about non-recoverable costs.
Yeah.
What are the non-recoverable costs each month?
They're currently about £500,000 a month. So we are year to date for this year, which is 11 months in, we're 5.4 million of under recoveries. We'll end up this year at 6 million. I know you've quoted me before saying the £1 million. What I will say for clarity is what I said at the time was it could get up to £1 million. So the December figure, for example, when the yard closes down for 2 weeks, there will be a lot of under recoveries there. Currently, at the moment, it's anywhere between £250,000 and £500,000.
So just so I understand it, you're not getting any more money for the Glen Rosa. Well, the extra money that you charge. So everything that is going on at the yard, the lights, the people, all the bills that you get in, are they not unrecoverable?
Yes, that's what the under recoveries are.
And that's
at the
just
moment.
half a million pounds
a
month in wage bills, electricity bills, rates bills, all the rest of it. It's only £500,000.
Correct. So, for example, there are people that are not working on either Glen Rosa or BE Systems work. They are working on, for example, the business case, the future of the yard, bids, or they are temporarily not able to do a trade, not able to do the work for a week or so, but we still need to obviously keep them. So these fall into under recoveries. Yeah,
just so I understand, sorry, I'm obviously being... You've been told that the Glen Rosa, it's going to cost extra money. So surely the people that are on the Glen Rosa, they've got to be unrecoverable as well. You're not getting any more money for them.
No, so for example, like the whole of the wage bill, if I take a trade, for example, I would take a welder. If they are on a certain amount, let's say it's £30,000, we'll just keep it round figures, £30,000 a year. If they're working full-time on Glen Rosa, there's no under recoveries at all. So
all their money will be paid for by the government?
Correct.
On the Glen Rosa contract?
Rosa, it will be charged to Glen Rosa. If, for example, they have 2 or 3 weeks in that year where just through sequencing the work, they don't have work to do, they will be put on to doing other work, and that work can't get charged to BE Systems, it can't get charged to Glen Rosa, so it's under recoveries. So we will then ask Scottish Government for that money.
So just imagine that Glen Rosa wasn't there, and,
yes.
and you were sat there at the moment,
yes.
and you hadn't got the contract. What would the unrecovery? What's it actually costing?
1.9 million a month.
£1.9 million a month.
And that is all salaries. If you were to keep 300 people employed, plus a warehouse, rent, audit fees, all the overheads, utilities, 1.9 million a month. You wouldn't do that. You would obviously scale down, but that would be the maximum that it would be.
And so it's pretty vital for Graham to make sure that he gets these contracts signed up and gets that money back. Otherwise, that's what it'll be costing the Scottish taxpayer to run the yard while nothing's actually happening.
As quickly as possible, and that's why we need to find alternatives once Glen Rosa, if there's a gap between Glen Rosa getting delivered and the new contracts, we need to find something for that.
Okay. I think that's all the questions. I would reiterate what Bob Doris said. I want to see Ferguson Marine be successful. Excuse me if I'm sceptical, having heard the same story from whether it be Clyde Blowers, Tim Hare, David Tyman, and now you, Graham. They're all the same stories. So let's hope that when I'm retired at home, working at home, I'm not going to be allowed to retire. When I'm working at home, that I see the Glen Rosa actually delivered at the end of this year and the contracts happen. But excuse me if I remain sceptical. And on that note, thank you very much. And we are now going to briefly suspend the meeting to allow a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Welcome back to this meeting of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. Our fourth item of consideration is Environmental Standards Scotland Strategy 26 to 31. It's laid before the Parliament by Environmental Standards Scotland under the procedure set out in the UK withdrawal from the European Union Continuity Scotland Act 2021. Environmental Standards Scotland is the independent body established under that Act to monitor compliance with the effectiveness of Environmental Law Scotland. The document's a revised version of ESS's original strategy, first published in 2022, and sets out how the organisation intends to exercise its functions over the period 26 to 31. An earlier version of the revised strategy was laid last year, but was subsequently withdrawn following consideration by the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee, which identified that certain information required by the Parent Act did not appear to be fully reflected in that document. A revised version was laid on the 5th February this year, and I note that the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee have now reported that they have no recommendations to make. This morning, the committee will take evidence from representatives of ESS before deciding whether it wishes to make any recommendations to the Parliament. If members have no concerns to raise, the committee may simply just note the document. Welcome to the meeting Dr. Richard Dixon, the Chair, Mark Roberts, the Chief Executive, and Neil Langhorne, the Head of Strategy and Analysis for Environmental Standards Scotland. Thank you for attending this morning. And Richard, I think you want to make an opening statement.
Yes, please. Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the committee for giving us the chance to come and talk about our new Environmental Standards Scotland strategy to cover the next 5 years. This builds on our successful 4.5 years of operation, and it takes us into a period of change. So we will be absorbing 2 new scrutiny functions, one on nature targets and one on the climate duties of local authorities and how they perform those. And of course, we'll be accountable to a new Parliament soon, with new members, new committees, and of course, a new set of legislative priorities. Our new strategy puts us in a strong position to deliver over these coming 5 years. We will be continuing to make sure that public bodies in Scotland comply with and effectively implement environmental law. And we'll be building on the achievements since we formally came into being in October 2021 as a non-ministerial office answerable to this Parliament. Our work is resulting in real change. So, for example, our investigations have led to increased support for local authorities in meeting their climate change duties, full implementation of the Ramsar Convention to safeguard Scotland's internationally important wetlands, and our findings on incineration have helped to prevent over-reliance on that method of waste management. You'll be familiar with our recent report on storm overflows, and that's being taken forward by Scottish Water, SEPA and the Scottish Government. And as in every case where we've agreed action with a public body or a group of bodies, we'll continue to monitor progress and scrutinise the implementation of our recommendations and hold those bodies to account. We've also recently made recommendations on topics as diverse as improving air quality, reducing marine litter, protecting soils, and eliminating non-native species, which all will make a difference to Scotland's environment and communities. Our strategy builds on the previous strategy and our last 4.5 years of work, and it sets 4 clear priorities for our proactive work, which are climate, nature, resources and water, that's fresh water, and the marine environment. The board worked closely with the staff of ESS to produce this strategy, and we carried out wide-ranging consultations, both online and in person. And we're grateful to everyone who took the time to respond, and we're pleased that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive for the proposals in our draft strategy. The feedback informed and improved the final version, which you have in front of you. We hope you liked it, and we're very happy to answer your questions.
Thanks very much, Richard. And I get to ask the first question. So my first question is, what lessons did you learn from your first strategy document on how to implement your strategy, your second strategy document?
Perhaps I'll start off on that and then hand over to Mark. So our first strategy was written when we'd only been operating for 6 months. And so it was a good strategy. It was certainly fit for purpose, but we learned a few things along the way. So one of those is the level of work we need to do to follow up investigations which are finished. So now quite a big part of our work is going back to public bodies and saying, well, have you done this now? What's the timetable for that? Having a discussion if it's off track. So that's quite a big part of the work that we perhaps naively didn't quite anticipate how big that would be. So that's now built into the new strategy. And another one is focus. So the first strategy listed 14 priorities, and we've progressed something on all of those 14 priorities, but that's why we've focused down to just 4 big priorities in this strategy to make that clearer for decision-making internally, clearer for external stakeholders where our big priorities are, without excluding everything else, but where the big priorities are. And of course, those are the big priorities for the proactive work that we decide off our own bat to do, but people can still bring us any subject they like, whether it's one of our priorities or not, and if it's within our remit, we will investigate it for them.
Okay. Mark, do you want to come in on that?
I don't really think there's much more to add. I think the key learning from my point of view was the need to sort of have a degree of more focus, as Richard says, because the breadth of our remit is really quite wide and the size of the organisation is relatively small. So, and as Richard describes in his opening statement, the diversity of areas that we cover and the different aspects of environmental law that we focus on is really varied, which was why in looking at the strategy I was very supportive of the board sort of saying there needs to be a little bit more focus and prioritisation.
Okay, looking forward then, with the work that you've got lined up, or with the areas that you want to concentrate on, some are proactive and some are reactive, how are you going to make sure you spend enough time making sure you get the right responses, i.e. the reactive ones, from the work that you're doing? I mean, I'm just slightly concerned that what I'm really keen to know, that if you start down a route, that people understand the seriousness when you make recommendations to actually sort things out. Perhaps you'd like to talk briefly about that.
I think what has happened is public bodies have got used to us being here. I mean, ESS was a new organisation, and that function had been didn't entirely replicate what went on previously pre-Brexit. But ESS is much more immediate than, say, the European Commission was. So we are talking to the Scottish Government, to SEPA, Nature Scotland, local authorities and other public authorities on a very regular basis. And so there has been, I think, a marked change across the 4.5 years of our existence in sort of a recognition of our role, how responsive public bodies are to us, the fact that we will keep coming back to people and following up on recommendations that we've made, on agreements that we've reached in terms of implementation. And as Richard says, those long tails of work now become quite a significant thing for us. So I think there has been a significant shift from, say, 2021 in terms of how public authorities are responding, and in the vast majority of cases we get a positive response from public authorities in terms of our requests for information, in terms of recommendations that we make. So there will always be a degree of tension in any scrutiny relationship, but on the whole I think it works reasonably well.
So you're saying, I think, Mark, the expression you said was they got used to your existence, but you're pretty sure they've not become too comfortable in your existence, with your existence.
I don't think they've become too comfortable, and I would imagine that if representatives from the public authorities that we scrutinise were here, they would probably say that ESS is on their case on a very, very regular and frequent basis.
Good. I'm going to go to the Deputy Convener who's got some questions. Michael.
Good morning. I want to turn to the enforcement role that you have as an organisation. I think it would be helpful to maybe get a sense, given your experience to date, of how you're finding the approach that you're taking to enforcement, which I understand is to deal with an informal resolution process in the first instance. If you can maybe just explain just how that's working, and any examples of how you feel it has worked or hasn't worked, I think would also be helpful to the committee, just to get a sense of the progress you're making.
Sure. So the 2021 Act that sets us up requires us to try and seek agreement with public authorities through a process of informal resolution. So it's perhaps helpful if kind of I set out the process that we go through, taking the example of when we receive a representation. So a member of public, an NGO, a community, an industry group may come to us with concerns about the way a piece of environmental law is implemented. We will do some pre-screening in terms of, is it in our remit? Is there an element of environmental law that this relates to? We'll follow that up with some research, which may involve engagement with public bodies, looking kind of more widely in terms of the context. We may use our powers under the Act to require them to provide us with information, so we can issue information notices requiring public bodies to provide us with data, documentation, and so forth. Having gathered all that information, we may identify areas of concern or areas where we think there could be improvement, and then we would approach the public authority to say, would you be willing to work with us on an informal resolution? And in the vast majority of cases, that works quite well. We go into that process. There is a significant amount of exchange in terms of us trying to say this is what we think should happen. The public authority may express some doubts, and we kind of go back and sort of reiterate our point, and that happens quite frequently. And when we are satisfied that the recommendations have been adequately implemented, or there is a plan in place to adequately implement it, we would consider that informal resolution closed and would issue a report. And then, as Richard said, we would follow up on that and make sure that recommendations were implemented. There have been cases where we haven't been able to reach agreement with public authorities, and we have brought to this committee 2 improvement reports where we were unable to reach agreement. One around air quality back in 2022, and one around local authorities' climate change duties. So when there is an improvement report laid in the Parliament, the Scottish Government and its relevant public authorities have to produce an improvement plan in response to that, which this Parliament has to approve. So that's an important element of our enforcement powers that we have used. What we haven't used during our first 4.5 years are the more stringent enforcement powers that we have around compliance notices or petitioning for judicial review. We have contemplated compliance notices and decided that that wasn't merited or action was taken where we were considering it. But those two remain sort of at the very pointy end of what our enforcement powers could be. And our strategy sets out the criteria that we have set for ourselves for when we would be to go down those routes. But I envisage and I would hope that we would, in the vast majority of cases, be able to secure improvement through informal resolution.
Okay, that's helpful. I presume, though, of course, as you go along, you will build up more experience around using informal resolution, but it'll also create an additional workload in having to potentially look at compliance with any changes that a public body has made following informal resolution. How are you going about managing that and being able to deal with what will be, I suspect, an increasing number of cases that you're having to take a rear view, mirror view look at as you go along and continue to try and make progress and deal with new issues as they arise?
It's an excellent question. As the Chair said in his opening statement, it is becoming a significant element of our work in terms of just how much follow-up there has to do and how much further exchange there is with public bodies. What we are in the process of doing is establishing a a formal programme management function within the organisation, as we've got to this stage and scale now where there are so many strands of work. I think we're currently in about 29 active representations that we're considering at the moment, a number of which, plus a number of which of past representations we're following up on. An example of which would be we will soon go back to SEPA to ask for an annual update on its programme of removing physical barriers, weirs from rivers, which we agreed a plan with them and we follow up with them every year. That programme management approach that I'm in the process of implementing will give us much more managed way of keeping on top of the resources that we've got available to do all that follow-up work. But it will absolutely be a growing piece of work and will get bigger as time goes on. Ultimately, some of these things will hopefully go away and that things will be solved, but it is a significant issue.
Well, in my experience, you tend to get more new things than things going away, so coming into your inbox. But I presume then getting the programme management structure in place is critical to make sure that the organisation is able to manage these cases in an effective, robust way without it becoming such a burden that the organisation then struggles to be able to actually deal with new and emerging issues as they arise.
Yes, I think it's critical, which is why I've put it in place, and it's not only the work in response to representations received. We are continually monitoring sort of developments going on sort of within the wider environmental law landscape, both internationally at a UK level, as well as in Scotland. We have our own, as Richard described, our proactive work where we're doing monitoring and analytical work. We have responded to an awful lot of consultations and calls to views. So those are all individual strands of work that we are putting together, which is why I think having that kind of more formal programme management structure is imperative at this stage in our development.
And Richard, from the board's perspective, are you satisfied that the executive team are able to manage this challenge and that will be capable of actually putting in place the type of project management arrangements to deal with what will become potentially quite a significant burden in the organisation?
Yes, we are. So we've discussed it a number of times, so it's a question we are keen to get reassurance on, that the resources are put in place, the scale of the challenge is recognised, and that we're able to cope, and that doesn't interfere, as you suggest, with the dealing with new stuff coming in. And we are certainly at the moment completely reassured that the organisation is on top of this. And we also fully support this activity, so we think it's absolutely essential, of course, that the organisation does make sure that things that have been agreed aren't left to slide, and that actually we make sure that the change that was promised does actually come. And we shouldn't make it sound like such a huge task. So, for instance, we write once a year to SEPA to ask them about weir removals, and if they write back and say, well, it's all on track, that's the end of that conversation for a year. If someone comes back to us and said, oh, well, actually, we've had a bit of delay, we're not going to do that yet, then there's a conversation to be had about what a new timescale might look like, and even a consideration which would come to the board about whether we should use one of our enforcement powers to make sure that something that has stalled moves. But that we haven't needed to do that yet, but it's something the board, I think, has clear sight on and is convinced that the organisation has a good handle on.
Okay. Thanks, Convener.
Michael. Mark, I think you've got some questions.
Yeah, thanks. Morning to you. I wanted to turn to the two new scrutiny function areas. So there's the powers that were granted under the Natural Environment Act in relation to scrutinising nature targets. And I think you mentioned, Richard, about the local climate change report. So could you just explain, firstly, with the nature targets, what your approach will be to that, and what kind of resource implications that is going to have to the organisation?
So the function we're taking on is to be the sort of independent scrutineer of Scottish Government's progress towards the statutory nature targets. So it might be helpful if I just set out kind of the timescales for that. So those targets, after the Act is commenced, those targets will have to be set, but through secondary legislation within a year of commencement. And then the next key date after that is 2030, which is set in the legislation. We are required by the Act to report at least every 3 years against progress against those targets, but we anticipate that there'll be work that we will want to do in advance of that 3-year frequency, not least because 2030 is actually not very far away in terms of from where we are now when those targets would actually be set. The setting of targets is obviously for Scottish ministers, advised by Nature Scott. We are observers in the sort of advisory group that's in development of that. We're not participants, clearly, given our scrutiny role. We have received an increase in our budget for 26-27, and some of that will be used to start the increase in terms of staff who will be specifically focused primarily on looking at those scrutiny of those statutory targets. So when they formally come in, I would anticipate we will start doing our work during 27-28, but
okay.
we will start that increase in staff numbers during 26-27.
Okay, so is it part of your role right now, beyond being an observer in the room, to ensure that process of target setting is on track, or effectively, are you waiting to see what the output is and then you'll start looking at implementation?
So to a certain extent, we're observing the process of development, and we do have to wait until those targets are set. I think that the most important thing that during as early as possible within the new Parliament, though that Act is commenced, and so that sets the clock ticking in terms of setting the actual targets. Again, because we will rapidly get to 2030 if it's not undertaken quite quickly.
Yeah, we're almost there, really, to be honest. And local climate change reports?
The local climate change reports, the committee might recall that this stems from an improvement report, as I've just discussed with the deputy convener, about local authorities' climate change reporting. The Scottish Government has updated its statutory guidance to public bodies around climate change duties, which was one of our recommendations from that, and that was published on Friday last week. So local authorities will start reporting against that new statutory guidance during 26-27, and we will start our scrutiny of that reporting during 27-28. Again, we'll start the process of expanding our staff numbers and recruiting new people in to do that specifically during the course of 26-27, as that will become something that we will have to do immediately in 27-28.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you'll be aware of this committee's conversation with the UK Climate Change Committee, particularly in relation to the draft climate change plan. And I guess I'm interested in your memorandum of understanding with the UK CCC. I mean, I think the impression that I got was that when CCC came to this committee was that resourcing is an issue. They only have 2 members of staff that actually cover Scotland, and I know they've got a very defined remit that's there in legislation. But it also strikes me that there are a range of bodies, yourself included, Audit Scotland, who have a role within this in terms of guiding the action and scrutinising whether action is appropriate enough to meet the targets. And I'm just interested in, is that situation evolving? How is that reflected in your memorandum of understanding? Because I think CCC were quite clear in terms of their resource constraints. And of course, unlike yourselves, they're not required to report to this committee on their resourcing requirements. It's not a matter for this Parliament.
So we are. Our memorandum of understanding is quite a high-level document in terms of where we will share information and collaborate. But at a practical level, what happens is we have a regular exchange at a variety of levels. So some members of Neil Langhorne's team meet with CCC on a regular basis to update them on our work within with regards to climate change. Richard and I have met the now relatively new Chief Executive, Emma Pinchbeck, and we provide them with information if we're doing any work within the climate change area. I anticipate that during the course of the next parliamentary session, we will want to focus on kind of the implementation of the climate change plan. I would imagine that the committee would be expecting us to do that, and so that will build on work that we previously did in response to a representation that we received during the course of 2022, if I recall correctly. And so that was about sort of the content and the detail and the implementation of climate change plans. So I suspect it will be one of those pieces of work that we will want to pursue, and we will do that in, if not collaboration, but making sure that other bodies like the CCC, like Audit Scotland, like the Scottish Fiscal Commission, we are all aware and we are aligned of what the different angles that we're all taking are, and respecting our different governance arrangements. And that was the approach that we took during the early part of 2025, when we all wrote to the committee saying these were our expectations around a good climate change plan. We will all operate independently, as is appropriate, but we will keep each other aware of what we're doing in that area.
So what would be your next actions then on that? Because, yes, I remember your submissions about what a good climate plan looks like. It was very useful, I think, for this committee, along with other organisations. But we're now at a point where, you know, we're about to hit dissolution. The new committee will take several months, I think, in the new session of Parliament to be up and running again. And we've got a draft climate plan that's going to be signed off, you know, in a matter of weeks. So there does seem to be an immediate kind of post-implementation of the plan, you know, reassessment that's needed. Are you working with those other organisations, Audit Scotland, Fiscal Commission, Climate Change Committee, on next steps, or are you very much waiting to see what scrutiny looks like in the next Parliament, what you're asked to do?
We're not actively in discussion with those bodies at the moment, but as Richard said in introducing the strategy, climate change is one of our priority areas. So we are at the moment going through a process of what should we look at underneath each of those four priorities. And one of the things that we may choose to look at might be implementation of the climate change plan. And if we did that, then that could start quite early in the next session. So, but again, we'll work through that prioritisation process. But I absolutely recognise that sort of there will be a time taken for new parliamentary committees to get established in the next session and make a decision as to whether or not they wish to focus on CCP implementation.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to move on then to you know, how you're able or not able to deal with individual cases and complaints. I think you probably had a couple from my office, not complaints about ESS, but individual, well, not yet anyway, but individual cases and complaints about regulators, about regulatory processes and problems. And I think the challenge we've had has been advising constituents to kind of frame their complaint in a way that points to perhaps a systemic problem with environmental law, or the way in which you know, regulation is being enforced that actually is replicable across Scotland. So we're trying to find a way to get around the individual complaints kind of issue by pointing to those wider kind of themes. Like, how are you now, 1 year on from the last time you were in front of this committee, kind of dealing with that? Because it is still a problem that the EU Commission, if you're still in the EU, can take on individual complaints and deal with them as individual complaints, whereas you're in theory quite restricted on that.
So the 2021 Act does restrict us from looking at kind of a complaint, say, about an individual regulatory decision, be it made by SEPA or by NatureScot or by a local authority. However, you're absolutely right, and we can take on representations that come into us if they are raising a wider systemic issue, as illustrated by an example of an individual case. So we are not here to second-guess regulators' decisions. That's not our role. But if it flags something more widely about a particular piece of legislation, we absolutely can do that. So the approach that you've described about how to help people in framing representations is absolutely correct, and that would fit within our remit. And we also provide support and advice to individuals in terms of them coming directly to us about how they might best frame their representations as well.
Okay, so what do you see then as the governance gap? I mean, is that something that you feel confident in talking about where it comes to, say, environmental courts or other governance gaps, or do you feel that's really something that's not for you to look at?
So I think where there may be an argument constructed for sort of whether or not there is a governance gap is around that review of individual cases. So, but that is not ESS's job, and so that's outside of our remit. So I know certain others have suggested that ought to be something we could do, or it ought to be something that an environmental court could take on. But what I'm just like to be clear with the committee is that's not a job for ESS. So as the Act currently is drafted.
Yeah, aware of that. Okay, I mean, finally, I was going to ask you about, effectively, we've got a legacy report to write in this committee. And I'm interested in your view because, you have had quite a close relationship with this committee. You have a formal role in terms of improvement notices coming back here. But I'm interested in where you think the successor committee should focus on in terms of its relationship with ESS, emerging priorities from your end. Do you see ways that you could engage better with a successor committee?
As I think the Chair said in his most recent updates to the committee, we would, however committees are constituted in the next Parliament, we would certainly make the offer of providing regular updates to the successor committee on our work. Personally speaking, I would very much like to have the type of relationship that we've had with this committee during this session of the Parliament. I think that's quite a practical and effective way of demonstrating how that accountability works and allowing us to bring things to the Parliament's attention in quite an effective way. Richard, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that.
So I agree with that in terms of relationship, and it could be, depending on the committees that are formed, it could be 2 committees that we have potentially in our sights. So I hope we will have a good relationship with successor committee or committees, and we'll work hard to try and make that happen. Just in terms of your work programme, I'm sure you will be saying that the climate change plan got a lot of scrutiny, but there wasn't much time for the Scottish Government to do very much about that before they finalised it. And so a key job for the successor committee or committees is to look at implementation and talk about Plan B if certain things don't come about. And that's a message we will be giving strongly. So I think we would both be saying the same sort of things there. And another key area that's unfinished business is about the Aarhus Convention and Scotland's continued non-compliance. And again, that's something we continue to work on. Again, we're very happy to talk to the successor committee about how to take forward that work and its relationship to environmental courts, because that may be the solution for our problems of non-compliance with some of the Aarhus Conventions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. I think my comment at the end of that would be, or 2 comments, one of which would be a question in a way is, of course, we don't have the final climate change plan yet. It's up to the government to lay it if they want to by the end of this Parliament, but they don't have to lay it by the end of this Parliament by the timescale. But one of the recommendations we put in there was about early warning indicators when things weren't going right. And my question to you, I guess, is that something you will take up with the government and future committees? Because surely that would form quite a basis for your work.
Yes, I think that's very sensible. Obviously, there's a big lag, a year and a half, in the climate data. So knowing that we haven't built as many cycle lanes or planted as many trees, we can know that much earlier, and those early warning indicators are very helpful in trying to take corrective action. Just to come back to the previous question about our MOU and our working relationship with CCC, the Climate Change Committee, obviously they have a small resource, but what they do is very technical work, and they advise government. And so Government doesn't have to take their advice, it does have to respond to it, and it's embarrassing perhaps for it not to go with that advice, but there are no statutory powers to force them to do anything CCC says. And so rather than looking at the very technical things that CCC looks at, we can look at the governance things, and we can use our powers, as we've done with the climate change duties for local authorities, to compel some action. So we take that dual role. They do the technical stuff, they give excellent advice, government has to respond to that, but we can look at the implementation and the governance systems, and we can try and make those better. So I'd hope that those two bits are complementary rather than overlapping.
Okay, my final comment is I think I remember the first meeting when we had in this committee with ESS, where it was the relationship was really penciled out in the sense that it was to be a close relationship between this committee and the ESS, but it wasn't be one of one telling the other what to do. And I think that will be the basis of any future relationship with committees, is to work closely, but allowing both sides to have their space to work within their areas. So thank you very much. I think that is all the questions we have. Thank you for coming in, and we are now going to move into private.
Thank you very much.